Peglin is a classic example of a roguelite that takes a simple game concept and adds a fun twist to it. I picked it up on a whim a couple weeks ago, and I've been having a lot of fun playing through it. That being said, there are a couple areas where Peglin could use some improvement, so let's get into it. At its core, Peglin takes the gameplay of Peggle and Pachinko and adds a basic combat and RPG element to it. You shoot orbs at a board of pegs, clearing pegs as you hit them. Once your orb reaches the bottom of the board, that turn is over, and you'll deal damage to enemies based on a combination of what orb you use and how many pegs you hit. In addition to the basic, normal pegs, there are 3 types of special pegs on the board. There are bomb pegs, which deal AoE damage to enemies. There are green R pegs, which reset the board and restore all pegs. And there are yellow exclamation point pegs, which give you critical damage when you hit them. Each orb you fire has a different number for both base damage and critical hit damage. For example, without any modifiers, the standard stone deals 2 base damage and 4 critical damage per peg hit. The critical damage is typically a lot higher than the base damage, so hitting those crit pegs can really raise your damage. And the crit damage is also applied retroactively. So if you hit 10 pegs and then hit the crit peg, all those previous 10 pegs hit are converted to critical damage. As mentioned, this core gameplay is basically the same as Peggle, but it has a couple additional mechanics. I love that simplicity of the game with the aiming, the random bounces, and just trying to clear the different boards with different strategies. Outside of the simple number and damage differences between orbs, most orbs also have a special effect as well. For example, there's a bouncy orb that bounces way further than a typical orb does. And there's the lightning orb, which clears extra pegs around each peg that you hit. The build crafting part of this game comes in with creating a set or deck of orbs that combo with each other, and also with relics, which are permanent buffs that you pick up throughout your runs. For example, you might pick up relics that make bombs deal more damage, and combo that with a bomb orb, which makes bombs spawn when it hits enough pegs. You can also sometimes upgrade orbs, which typically either increases their damage numbers or increases the power of their special ability. As a whole, I would say the game actually has a surprising amount of different builds and combos. There are a number of unique orbs and relics with fun special effects. For example, one relic makes your orbs go back to the top, restart, if they hit a certain slot at the bottom. I had a lot of fun exploring different combos, but there still were a couple things I didn't like about build crafting. I'll come back to those a little later on. One gameplay element that is really great is a discard option. You're given 1 discard, which means you can skip on a given orb if you don't want to play it. After you play an orb, your discard resets, so if you wanted to, you could theoretically discard every other orb. This is really great because it allows you to carry some more niche, powerful orbs without being forced to use those orbs outside of those very specific niche situations where they're useful. Above the Pachinko board, enemies march towards your character, a Peglin, either on the ground or in the air. Most enemies attack your character when in melee range, but there are a couple of characters that deal range damage as well. While some fights and bosses are just a single enemy with a large health bar, most encounters involve a large number of enemies that need to be cleared, that need to be killed. You only have so much health, and when your health reaches 0, you lose your run and you have to start over. The enemies and boards change as you fight through 3 distinct areas, each of which end in a boss fight. You navigate a standard Slay the Spire-like overworld where you encounter random events, fights, relic chests, and mini bosses. Winning standard fights gives the options to add new orbs or upgrades to existing orbs, while relics mostly come from random events and boss fights. One unique quality of navigating the overworld is that when you have to pick your next area, you use the Pachinko or Peggle board. So while you almost always get the path you want, I did occasionally have unintentional bounces that led me down a different path, not the one that I wanted. I don't think there's anything that special about the overworld dynamic in Peglin outside of that occasional path randomness, but it gets the job done pretty effectively. One important thing to note about Peglin is that it has basically no cross-run progression. From the start, every orb, every relic is available for you to use. And there are no cross-run buffs, no cross-run power-ups, nothing like that for you to unlock. The one main exception there is the game does have difficulty levels for you to climb if you want to. After you clear a run, you can tackle the game at higher Crucible levels that come with standard challenges. For example, Crucible level 1 makes your stones deal less crit damage at the start, making your starting build worse off and weakening stone builds throughout your entire run. The final thing I'll say here is Peglin recently added some game speed options, and those allow you to speed up the game as you play through it. I think these speed options are really great, and I basically exclusively play the game on 1.5 speed now. So I really like the core gameplay of Peglin, and I've had a lot of fun playing through this game. That being said, I think the game has a couple flaws and frustration points that I would like to see addressed or improved upon as the game continues in early access. First, let's talk about build crafting. As I said earlier, I had a surprising amount of fun build crafting in this game. They've been adding more orbs and more relics, which have led to new synergies and fun combos. But I think as the game stands right now, these builds are poorly balanced for three main reasons. Because most of the encounters in this game have a small army of enemies attacking you, you need to deal AoE damage to be effective. There are orbs and relics that can be added to every single build that give that AoE damage, but the bombs are by far the best, or at least the easiest, source of AoE damage in the game. Because of that ease of access, because of how many good bomb relics exist in the game, bomb builds felt incredibly overpowered relative to others. In a similar vein, the amount of ranged enemies in the game means that you'll often take damage in fights, even with strong builds. Because of that, having some healing relics is incredibly important, and I found that with in-fight healing to be doubly important. Maybe I'm just bad at this game, but all of my successful clears and wins have been when I had a good source of within-fight healing. So it felt really bad when I had good builds, fun runs, but I ended up losing them because I didn't have that RNG to get a good healing relic. Finally, I had a number of builds that felt really good at first, but were hard countered unexpectedly by random enemies or bosses. It's hard to really expand on this point without giving a long-winded explanation of certain builds and certain boss mechanics, but when these hard counters happened, they were pretty frustrating. Individually, I think any of these three elements would be fine. Part of the fun in learning a new roguelite for me is learning what builds work and what builds don't. Having to learn the importance of healing or having to learn how to prepare for certain enemies that might counter my build are things that can be fun learning experiences. They can be enjoyable. But I think in Peglin, all three of these build limitations stacked on top of each other, and it made the build crafting just feel a lot more limited than I would have liked. There were fewer viable builds than I wanted, and certain things like having to rely on RNG to give me a good healing relic were sometimes frustrating and annoying. And on that note, let's talk about the RNG and randomness in Peglin. Because of the core gameplay, there's a lot of baked in RNG and randomness. While you obviously can control your aim and where your orbs go, there will always be some random bounces that can really help you or really hurt you. In my opinion, that's part of the fun of a game like this, just seeing things bounce around, a little bit of unpredictability baked in. But it could occasionally lead to very frustrating moments. When you wanted to hit a very specific peg, like a bomb peg, you just kept getting bad bounces. And as I mentioned earlier, you can also get bad luck when choosing your overworld pathing, so you might miss an event or a mini boss that you wanted to fight because of that. As a whole, I think the RNG in Peglin is fine. It's meant to have a certain amount of randomness baked into the game because it involves random bounces, orbs going all over the place. The biggest fix that I want to see here, though, is really a fix to build crafting. I would really like to be able to more reliably get good healing and things like that. I had one run with 15 or so relics, and I never had the option to pick a good healing relic, and that felt frustrating. So now let's finish up with some miscellaneous things that I'd like to see improved for Peglin. This game has some random bugs. There were times where I just randomly couldn't shoot my orbs. I would have to keep moving my cursor or open and close a menu, things like that before the game registered my clicks and fired the orb. For whatever reason, this seemed to happen more often when I was navigating the overworld as opposed to within fights themselves. Not sure why that was. And also, opening up the main menu resets your speed options back to the slower default. This was a more minor annoyance, but it really confused me before I realized what was happening. None of these bugs ruined the overall experience, but they definitely were annoying when they popped up. Outside of that, there are some content changes that I would like to see. I think the game already has okay enemy, orb, and relic variety as it stands right now, but I would like to see some more changes, as I've already discussed, to allow for more different, actually viable build types. Additionally, I would like to see some more boss variety. I also really did not like one of the Area 2 bosses. It's basically an incredibly simple enemy with a huge health pool with an insta-loss, uncounterable timer attached to it. You either kill this boss in a certain number of turns, or you lose. I actually found this boss to be more challenging and frustrating than the final boss, and it's an example of one of those bosses that hard countered certain builds without a corresponding fun element to go with it. I just think this boss is boring and not very fun. I do know the developers plan to add more content to Peglin. It's an early access game, and that's what you do in early access. And they've explicitly list plans to add more bosses, orbs, and new starting classes. I really want to see how these starting classes pan out. Right now, you always start with a single random relic and the same 4 orbs, and that's fine, but some more early game variety would be great. And if they could use those classes to add more viable build variety, I'll be incredibly happy about that new content. So what's my verdict on Peglin? As a whole, I actually really enjoyed the game. When I see an early access roguelite, the main thing I want to see is a good core gameplay loop, and Peglin absolutely delivers on that front. I think it's a great take on Peggle and Pachinko games, and I like the roguelite elements that they added. I do think this game has a couple areas that could use some improvement though. Namely, I want to see better build crafting balance to allow for more viable builds. Additionally, as with pretty much every single early access game, I just want to see some more content added to this game. Still, I've already gotten my money's worth from this game during early access, and I'm really excited to see what they add to this game as they keep working on it. Huge thank you and shout out to all of our channel members for helping support the channel. Please like this video to help me out in the algorithm, and thanks for watching.